Hi guys, today I had the pleasure of sitting down with a good friend of mine, Prashant Bhayani, Chief Investment Officer for BNP Paribas Wealth Management here in Asia. It was a real privilege to sit down and understand his journey growing up in the suburbs of the US just outside of Chicago to his time in Northwestern University before moving to New York and embarking upon his career in banking. We learned how he moved to London, got his MBA in INSEAD in a year, before working at Goldman Sachs and really learning his craft. After that time, the part of the journey I really found interesting was when he set up his own company with a business partner before going through the global financial crisis, which led to his journey working for JP Morgan. And then, of course, his time here in Singapore with BNP Paribas. Perhaps the most interesting side is when we learn a little bit about his personal life, what he did growing up from being a paper boy, throwing newspapers over the white picket fences in the US to being a DJ. And lastly, and the thing that I really found interesting was his time growing up watching basketball. He was privileged enough to see Michael Jordan play live, not once, but many times, both in the US and in Paris. Thanks, Prashant. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Cheers.
Prashant, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, it's great to be here. It's a beautiful morning.
It's brilliant. You look fantastic. You know, I've known you for many, many years, and you're Benjamin Button. You're aging in reverse.
You're too kind.
Well, listen, I want to just quickly go through what you're doing right now. And then if it's possible, I want to talk about your career journey because you've had a really interesting and dynamic career. So if you can, just share a little bit with us and the audience about what your current role is, please.
Sure. I'm Chief Investment Officer at BNP Paribas Wealth Management in Singapore. So that keeps me busy during the daytime. Happy to progress. So let's talk more.
Good man. So the key thing with this podcast is really to step behind the curtain and find out about, you, not just your investment ideas. Now, a lot of people won't necessarily know your history, but can just share like where you were born because you were, raised in the US, right? And India. Tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, I guess I grew up bicultural. My parents moved to the US 50 years ago, and I was born there. I grew up there. So my experience in India is visiting relatives. So, you go from a US suburb to visiting Bombay, India. So that was one extreme to the other, but I enjoyed it. And I think I grew up in a Midwestern US town. So you're kind of idyllic suburb. I was a paper boy. So this is the guy that in the winter has to throw the paper and make it on the porch. If it's raining, you're in big trouble. So the next day you'll get the clients complaining. So very early you learn client management.
Did you have a BMX bike? That's what I want to know.
Yeah, I had a BMX bike. I had the strap when we go around in the summer. It's wonderful. You ride by, and once you get skilled, you can throw it, and boom, hits the door, that thud, and down.
Love it.
But you learn very quickly. You have to have a backup plan, just like in work. So if you're on holiday, who's going to distribute the paper? So very quickly you learn the reality of trying to go on holiday with your family. You learn how to get tips because this is Midwest USA. People are so friendly. People are so nice. But when you go, you had to collect the money on behalf of the newspaper, and you hopefully get a tip for your troubles. But some people can, some people can't. But you learn very quickly people who appreciate your work, but that's it. Other people who are socialized with you, but you're knocking on their door in the middle of the day. So they could be cooking or they could be taking care of their kids. So it's like real life. But you can apply it to. You learn very quickly that. How you have to do collection, how you have to do service. When you mess up and miss a house, who is a new subscriber, and the next day. But it was fun as well because it was something where it was pocket change. You don't have much money as a kid, so you gave you enough for your allowance.
Now, one of the things that you've told me about doing, which I try to do, is read the room, right? And I remember you telling me you had a job when you were younger, which really meant you had to read the room well or you'd be booed.
Yes. Well, I peaked very early in life, Paul. I was a DJ in high school.
Okay.
Almost fell into by accident with two other people, Russell and Brandon. So three of us started like a turnabout DJ service, but just because our high school.
How old were you?
I was about 16.
Okay. So I was thinking Fresh Prince and Jazzy Jeff.
Yeah, exactly. Miami Sound Machine, Dr. Dre. We played it all. But you're right. It started. I loved music. I love music, all kinds, whether it's jazz to hip hop or whatever it is. But at that time, we were just young, and when we had turntables. This was before electronic.
Yeah.
And the hardest part was at the beginning. You can't get too close; it'll skip.
Yeah.
But you had to read the room because there might be music I like. I might like Dr. Dre, or I might like Miami Sound Machine, whatever it is, but someone else might not. So very quickly, just like work, you get instant feedback. People are coming off the dance floor.
Yeah.
People aren't really animated. You've got to put on the music they want. You got to take the requests, and you got to, again, filter. What's your filter? You've got to filter the requests from, everyone makes requests.
Okay.
Especially your friends.
Yeah.
Hey, can I play this? But which ones are going to resonate with the audience? So we learned very quickly that, okay, we got to now lift the volume, the energy in the room. Just like if I'm presenting an outlook, I'm presenting to a client, or any of us are, something can be a little bit off, energy's low. How do you reignite energy? DJing was the way to learn about that, but we didn't know I was learning that then.
The question is, have you ever done BNP Paribas D&D, dinner and dance?
No, I'm definitely retired. I don't think they even know to ask me. But
listen, I'm 100% expecting at the next D&D you're going to be spinning some decks.
Okay, we'll see. Okay, I hope they're listening. Maybe I'll get a request. But I'm sure they'll regret it I don't think that this generation will like the music I play. I might just play what I like.
Did you have a name?
Yeah, it was called Turnabout DJ Service.
Wow.
So
did you do different gigs like bar mitzvahs, or what were you doing?
We started by accident because our high school, we didn't have, at some point we couldn't get someone, and then three of us volunteered, the three of us that formed this service from the same high school. And then because of that, it just took a life on its own. Like
amazing.
Other high schools in the region started asking us, grade schools that I went to earlier, the kids that were 4 years young go, "You're DJing here?" So then it took on a life of its own. And then, of course, my parents weren't very excited. The Asian parents were like, "Oh,
what are you doing?"
I took all the stereo equipment, blowing off the woofer and tweeters. And this is, again, about the backup plan.
Yeah.
You have to have a backup for your own speaker systems. Again, it's just like setting up for a meeting or setting up for having the right materials. It seems easy, but when you have all the equipment and something goes wrong with the equipment, that you can't have that. So you have to have built-in redundancy, but I have a limited budget. So what did that mean? Taking all the equipment from my house, my other two friends' house, and mixing and matching and make sure enough. And then once we had raised enough money from a few gigs, then we could buy more proper equipment. So you have to learn you at the beginning, you're bootstrapping, and later on, it's a little bit better because you have the proper money to reinvest in a business.
Now, I'm not expecting you to comment on this, but I'm guessing you also did this because you realized this was a way to meet girls.
Well, of course, I'm a nerd, right? So that was the way to make some friends, yeah? So that was you definitely picking up some subtle highlights there, but yeah, of course.
Just to end on that note, one thing that when I'm teaching people, my guys in particular, on sales, so in sales, you face an objection, and historically a salesperson will be taught a rebuttal. And I always think that's elementary because at that point, you immediately get a no. So when I teach people, teach people the yes platform, which is an underlying where you get the person in agreement with you. So what I teach people is, well, if you are about to present something, you need to give a credibility statement that takes away the objection. So if I'm introducing a bank that's going through a mess, I'll just say, look, this particular organization is going through a lot of challenges right now. For the wrong person, they're going to say it's a mess. For the right person, and I believe you could go in there and clean the entire business up and turn it around. And at that point, the individual's saying yes, they're nodding, and they're going through the whole flow process. Why I mention that is, if you've ever watched 8 Mile with Eminem, when he's in his final rap battles, he basically cusses himself, saying, look, what are you going to say about me? And then he says everything that guy can say, takes it away, and he disarms the person. So it's quite interesting, right?
No, you're right. I mean, that's things like that. You don't know growing up what you're learning when I was a paperboy or DJ, but then later on you quickly learn because you get instant feedback from the audience. So that's a very tough job. But like you said, these performers now, and like we talk about Taylor Swift, I think we avoided a recession in Singapore because of Taylor Swift for a quarter. But now it's on a different level, and people, they have a social media profile, and they give the starting vodka brands, and it's incredible what the entertainment has done because the influencer and social media, and in our day, we had Michael Jackson and Prince and the Rolling Stones, but obviously Rolling Stones predate me, okay, so be careful there. But in general, it's the profiling, the media side. There's a lot of things you can take away for business.
Well, the interesting thing is, because I've met a lot of bankers that, talk well, bit of smack talk, but it's not really smack talk like on the football field or, when I did martial arts and combat. there was a lot of banter, and in the US and in the UK, there's so much banter. So I worked on a building site, and you couldn't turn sideways. You couldn't miss it. It's like darts being thrown at you constantly, and that's a good training ground for private banking, I would say.
Yeah, and you're right, because that how you connect's really important, and like you said, culturally, like, so whether you're US, UK, Singapore, Asia, that ability to connect with people is something that it's essential, but it's not always easy. You got to find a way, but you also have to be authentic to yourself.
Yeah,
because people see if you're not authentic. So I think if you can find a connection, or you can just find really what's this person interested in. But I think that is something which is definitely, EQ is so underrated in our business.
Yeah.
In life.
How was Chicago during the winter? Because I've been there, in September time, and it was a bit breezy, but I can't even imagine.
Yeah, Windy City. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's true 4 seasons. I think reputation is, of course, the winter and cold winter, wind off Lake Michigan, Chicago Bears football. But so that can be pretty rough. But it's sunny in the winter. So I lived in the UK a long time, so it's a slightly grayer. That's one difference. And the other thing is that it's true 4 seasons. So summer, people have their boats on Lake Michigan, and they're doing lots of stuff outdoors. So it just depends what time of year you visit.
Did you ever see Michael Jordan play?
Oh, yes, I did.
Really?
I was.
How many times? Just one time?
Well, that's a good question. So when I was in universities, I was at university near Chicago. Me and my friends, and I'm a huge sports fan, a huge basketball fan, and of course I was at the right time, right place, Michael Jordan in Chicago.
Amazing.
We camped out all night to get season tickets.
Wow.
And then we're college students, so we resold some to pay for get our money back, and then we used the rest to go to games. So we went to a number of games during the years, and I watched all 82 games of the season. They won their first championship in my last year.
That's amazing.
I guess I didn't do much studying. But,
Did you watch The Last Dance, by the way?
Absolutely.
Brilliant, right?
Absolutely. And during COVID, it was the perfect time to turn on TV.
We've always known how amazing he is, but when you peel back and find out the killer that he truly was, and his killer instincts, really amazing. Arguably the greatest athlete of all time, right?
Yeah, in my books, that's an easy one. But but no, he's a real character, and you learned a lot on that, about someone that you never knew, even though with all the newspaper coverage, all the press coverage during his career, but that was pretty intimate.
Well, when I went to Chicago last, we were doing the architect kind of tour on the river, and a stealth bomber came over us, and there was a big game on, and it was quite scary because for a moment you didn't know what it was, and it was amazing. I'll never forget it. It was. Have you ever seen one there? During the US?
Yeah, I've seen it, but yeah,
it's amazing, right? Yeah. Absolutely beautiful. So you grew up in a suburb, right, doing the paper rounds, and then how did you decide what you wanted to do at uni? Because you went to Northwestern.
Yeah, I think when I was there, I did have an interest in business or finance or a certain degree, but I had a classic liberal arts education. I had everything from intro to Buddhism to calculus, and what I loved was taking a lot of different subjects. It makes you more of an all-rounder.
Do you think that works? Because I know in the US, vis-a-vis the UK, that's the system, and it allows you to find yourself a little bit, right?
No, you're right. I think it's really, if you know what you want to do early, it's okay. Even in the US system, you can specialize, but not as much as the UK, for example, where of course, I'm aware of. So it depends. But what I liked is, for example, if you took intro to Buddhism and you took calculus, you took philosophy, there's a lot of things that about, thinking outside the box, making connections you don't think were there till you take it. So it depends on your interests. But sometimes you don't know at that age what you're interested in. You can take a course. I remember it can be the professor. If the professor's good, you're interested in the subject. If not, it could be an interesting subject, you're not there. But I think the flexibility played to my interests, which is I'm interested in quite a few things, maybe outside of just my degree, which was economics. So
I mean, in fact, normally when we talk, we really don't talk about work or business. We talk about other things, right? So what did you study at university?
Yeah, so I was an economics major.
Okay.
So that was my major. But then
you were always good at math?
I enjoyed it. I would say what I enjoyed is the practical applications of it.
Okay.
Because there's a theory and there's a practice. So that's what I got out of it. But I think, but I loved like I was saying, Intro to Buddhism course, or I loved my other courses that were there that were outside European civilization. I like history. I like political science. So I think it was that mix of things. But of course, in the end, I think economics, you couldn't take undergraduate accounting or some things like that, which a little bit more in my mind, mundane. You can learn that on the job later, perhaps.
True.
It's very useful.
Yeah.
So you're behind if you don't have that. Don't get me wrong. But I think that economics gives you that grounding, especially if you're working in banking.
So once you finished, New York beckoned, did it?
Yeah, New York City, the big city. So I came from a small town in New York. I still remember landing.
What year was
New
it?
York? Oh, 1991.
Why I ask is because New York back in the day was very different, very, very different, right?
Yeah, it was. I still remember coming across Brooklyn Bridge, Sting. Hearing the music, and you're arriving in New York, and like, wow, I've really arrived. But I think what was unique about it was just the diversity and the people, and people come from all over the world, and all kinds of backgrounds. Not just banking, but art.
New
art,
York's got an edge,
music.
right?
Yeah,
It really has an edge to it. Is it? If I said to you, what were your top 3 favorite cities? Oh, what'd you go with?
it's a tough one
Or maybe
because
top
I have
5.
a lot of them.
Come on, give us a few.
No, it's pluses and minuses. I would say, of course, I love my hometown, Chicago, but I do like New York and London. I think they're connected in interesting ways, in terms of the diversity, in terms of people you meet, in terms of culture, arts. Because you can be working in a bank, but you can be doing something really interesting. You could be watching reggae music on a Sunday night, at 3 a.m. if you want in New York City. So that's what I loved about it. But it's really the people.
Yeah.
But that's why Singapore is interesting, because this place is also a melange of different cultures. So different cities have different positive and negatives, but London also became a second home to me as well.
I know. We'll come into that.
Yeah.
Well, the thing they talk about Singapore, what I love now is because for a long time, what I love about London and New York is that if you want to go and watch a play, I love plays, right? You can nearly always find a star in Broadway, off Broadway, right? And in Singapore, we haven't had that recently, but now they're starting to, like Taylor Swift was here for however many nights and so on and so forth. So when you arrive to New York, right? Citibank?
Chase Manhattan.
Chase, okay. Apologies, Chase,
No,
okay. And how did that come about? How did you decide going from economics into banking?
I was lucky enough to get, it was a rough time then. We were coming through a banking crisis back then, and but I was lucky enough to get into a corporate banking training program at Chase Manhattan.
Okay.
And what drew me to it was really like, I trained with people from all over the world, from UK, Europe, France, and they were all based in New York for a year. So it was really that exposure of rotating around a bank and the international exposure as well. So I remember because they introduced us to other people in the program before we started, because this is New York City, the rents are high, right?
Yeah.
So you want to find a flatmate. So I met my flatmate on the phone. This is before video calls. And he had an image of me coming from the U.S., Midwest, but I definitely didn't fit what he thought. And I had an image of him. He's from Paris, France. And when we met, we're like, hey, but we just hit it off right away. We lived in Park Slope, Brooklyn. We shared a house there, small house that we took over from the prior analyst class that was graduating.
Okay.
He's one of my best friends till now.
Amazing, right?
Worked with him in another company in London later.
Wow.
It just shows you how you build, how you don't know which way the life twists and turns. But that was probably the most stimulating.
Well, those friendships that you make early on, they tend to last, right? Because you're both in the same boat, you're up and coming, brilliant. And then,
it's also, it's that common moment in time. It's like, right, high school or certain moments in life. Well, you're in a training program together, you went through certain experience together.
Yeah.
It's your first time in the working world, and you just form those bonds. And
those formative years, right? Yeah. So what happened after that?
Yeah, so I was interested in asset management. So I worked in fixed income asset management for several years, which I enjoyed. I was there when the bond market blew up. The last time we had interest rate cycles a long time ago. But importantly, that firm had an opportunity to work in London.
Okay.
And I'd been to London as a tourist, but never worked there. But I was intrigued by it. I had a French roommate, so I had already friends in Europe.
Yeah.
So again, looking back, I didn't think about it that way, but maybe that played into it.
Yeah. How old were you?
I was 24, 25.
Because why I ask that question is I tell my kids this: if you don't seize the opportunity to move abroad when you're young, it may not happen, because you sowed down seeds and what have you. So how did you feel? Were you nervous or anxious about going over?
No, it's mixed, because have a lot of friends. You have your whole social life set up somewhere.
Yeah.
And you go somewhere where, okay, you know a few people, you can meet people through work. So I met people through work. But I'd say, again, the Europeans that were in my program at Chase, Manhattan, that now were all over Europe, were some of the people that come into London. One moved to London, that good friend. So later on. So then through friends of friends, I started making quite a few friends. But the first 3-6 months, you're like, what did I do? It's Friday night. I'm sitting at home alone because you don't know. You have to take a little time to make a friend network.
For sure.
So, but then, it started changing.
So tell us about London, the job.
Yeah, so with London, I think the job was interesting because it was a time when London was, if you remember London then, this was Cool Britannia, Oasis, Blur. It was a real change where London was booming.
Yeah.
A lot of Europeans were coming to London to work in banks and consulting, other places. So it was a really interesting time. And for my career, it was more like, at that point in your career, especially earlier on, it was like, you almost had to go do an MBA at that point in banking. It was almost like you go to MBA and come back. So it's like, okay, where do I want to do that? I had gotten admittance to some U.S. business schools before I went.
Yeah.
But then it changed me. Being in London, I'm like, if I go to U.S. business school, just like you said, if you don't go to Broad early, it's a little bit tougher as you get older. I made a decision, I won't go. I'll apply. I went to INSEAD because I wanted to go back to London and stay abroad, at least at that time. And my parents thought I'd be back in a few years. But that's really the change that happened.
That's a big decision, right? To stop working for a year, dedicate yourself. If you don't mind me asking, how did you financially, bankroll that? And
yeah, it's what between New York and London, you don't have that many savings at that age, but you have a bit of savings. But then, of course, you have student loans and other things that you take on. The good news is that you have time to pay, as you know, to pay back, or you can hope that it gets forgiven these days. But we didn't have that option. But INSEAD is actually a 1-year program.
Yeah.
So actually, from purely that perspective, it's actually a little bit less in terms of time.
Well, it's maybe it's full circle because obviously they've got such a big base now here in Singapore, right? So okay. And then how did you find that whole MBA experience? Was it worthwhile? Would you recommend it for other people?
Oh, red wine, yes. So really recommend it. No, it was really stimulating. Part of the reason being abroad and going INSEAD was INSEAD had no more at that point 10% from one country, so no culture dominated. It was so international. That's what I loved about it. So I think the British were the biggest class, a little over 10%. The French, Americans. I have Lebanese friends, Dutch friends, from all over the world, Brazilian. So that's what I really enjoyed about the most. Second thing was, it was your last chance to feel like you're in college again, a little bit older.
Yeah.
Because it's in a small town called Fontainebleau in France, which is the only real famous thing. There's a hunting lodge of Louis XIV there.
Yeah.
But students live in like a 20-minute radius, a lot of times in old country houses that have been rented out. Some lived even in chateaux. There are people that are probably rich, cash poor, but they rented out a small wing on the cheap because we're students.
Yeah.
So the parties you could have and the social life was really fun. At the same time, it was intense because you did a 2-year MBA in less time.
Yeah.
But then it's, you could every few months, we'd go to Paris for a night out. I remember the Chicago Bulls visited, so I was there when that happened.
Wow.
But so that mix, and you can get on the Eurostar, hop around London or go to Spain. Easy. So that was the fun part, but it was a lot of work, of course.
Intense, right?
Yeah.
Very intense. But again, it's full circle because then you ended up working with a French bank. So then continue your journey after that. Your next gig, which was a fantastic one.
Yeah, so then I moved, I had always interested in stocks and equities, and I'd worked on my current fixed income. And so I came out of INSEAD enjoying Goldman Sachs Asset Management. So I was in the Buyside in equities. And at that point...
was that a real coup for you? Getting into Goldman?
Yeah, it was a privilege because Buyside is actually a relatively small industry. It's scalable, right? If you manage $5 billion, you don't need that much more money to manage 10 billion or 20 billion. And it's a more specialized job search. So if you're looking at investment banking or you're looking at consulting, there are many more hires. So you have to do more of an independent job search. I was fortunate they actually came to our campus. And I still remember because the partner that was running fixed income, then I saw my resume and put me my CV and said, fixed income. But I told him in the interview, you got to take a chance. Because I could have played that and said, okay, maybe I'll get to the next. I said, listen, I'm really enjoyed that time. That gave me the macro grounding. I understand interest rates, economic policy, but I'm actually interested in moving to equity fund. He actually was proactive. He recommended me for that group.
Fantastic.
So then of course you go for all the interviews in London and all that, but you need to have also someone that has that vision.
Yeah.
And that told me something about the culture.
Well, their culture really is quite amazing, right? They look at the individual and think, how can this person really excel, right? Because I think in a lot of organizations, you have to fit within a role, right? But I think with Goldman, their psychology is very, very different.
Yeah, and it was also that individual. He had the vision. Maybe someone else wouldn't have, So
True.
Sometimes you have to play, you have to take a chance. But of course, he was there. But I think, now these days, I think that's more common. I think there's more mobility now.
Do you find, I mean, this is a bit of a generalization, but there's a big difference in terms of personalities typically between a fixed income practitioner, an equity practitioner, and an FX practitioner. Have you found that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're thinking about equities, it's about stocks, it's about stories, it's about management. You're investing in companies. What's their competitive advantage? And that's a very different process than analyzing the Fed minutes, and you're looking at interest rate differentials. So there are some similarities in terms of doing analysis, but in terms of equities, it's much more idiosyncratic.
Yeah.
Because you can have a stock that blows up, 30% in the same industry, but on the interest rates policy, of course, you can have volatility and move that, but it's a different dynamic and it's a different rhythm. But you're right, and there are few people that moved between. It wasn't necessarily planned. I majored in economics and I was interested in asset management, so fixed income made sense. But then over time, I got more interested in investing in stocks. So it really depends on your interest.
It does. Well, actually, I mean, we'll come back, but I digress. But 5 of the family offices that I've worked with, on average, about 70% of their holdings are in fixed income. And, when they've come to me and said, look, we want to hire a CIO or a head of investment. But typically, when I met with the owners of the families, they're enamored with what a banker is or an investment counselor is.
Yeah.
And I said, actually, based on what you shared with me, I actually think you need to hire a product specialist. And I said, look, you do a litmus test and you can find out, technically what you're looking for. And also, I tend to think most bankers may not want to be in that role because they like being out there and meeting different clients vis-a-vis a product specialist. So it is interesting. So Goldman, unpack that. So you're back in London now, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I joined as an associate. So you get some sectors to cover to chew your teeth on. And it's hugely humbling because there's nowhere to hide.
Yeah.
You're owning, over time you get the trust of the senior PMs and you're given a sector to cover. And then they'll grill you on the companies you built models. You've seen the management.
Did you cover?
The first one, I was a fixed income guy, so they gave me utilities.
Okay.
But then I was fortunate, and that's made me, again, it's about being an all-rounder, I think. So I covered then telecom, I covered energy.
Telco back then was, the big one, right?
Yeah, and then we had the internet bubble.
Yeah.
I still remember some echoes now, but it's different where you have the huge concentration of the market. I still remember Cisco at that time. Yeah. So that was an amazing time. But it was hugely humbling as well because you come in the morning, the European results are at 8 a.m. or some of the international results. You had to come in early, update your model, be ready, and then you are grilled on that stock by the senior portfolio managers, and they smell BS a mile away. Yeah. So, and it's about judgment. It's about shades of gray. This is not like school.
Yeah.
And you could be owning 200, 300 million pounds or dollars of these companies, and it's how you think on your feet, how you react, how you follow up. And it takes time because investing is also experience matters. I'm not a big believer that you need to have a certain amount of years.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like for example, I invest. I remember one of the first names I looked at. It was a utility, so it's a relatively stable industry, not that volatile, and bought a interesting company for the portfolio. It was performing well. Then the regulator changed the tariffs.
Yeah.
So you have to. Then it's really how you deal with that volatility. And of course, the PMs have gone through these things, but they see very quickly your mindset.
Well, I think when you're, whenever we do senior placements, the reality is if someone hasn't been through 2 or 3 recessions, you've got to question, what their knowledge is and how they tackle those problems. Do you know what I mean? I'm curious, did you have any mentors during your time at Goldman?
You do. I mean, I think...
How did that work?
Yeah, I think I was fortunate that one of my, one of the senior PMs eventually became my manager, but was mentoring me before. And
is it an official thing, or does someone say, look, or you go to someone and say, look, can you mentor me? How does it work?
That's a good question. At that time, I remember when I was in associate program, you did have some mentors that assigned you, but this one was you found out just through relationship, common interests. It's a good question, Paul, because I enjoy mentoring. I was mentored, but people are flattered if you ask them. People want to give their time. They don't know that you may want guidance. So with with this individual, he was always coaching me because I also needed improvement, but it was beyond just work. It was about other things.
It has to be. But I think that the challenge with finding a really good mentor, they have to like you and care enough about you to be honest, to spend time with you. And it was funny because, I was a massive fan of Karate Kid 1. Well, I actually watched Karate Kid 2 first because I was quite young when it was released. And it's 40 years,
Ralph Macchio.
Yeah, Ralph Macchio, wax on, wax off. But I remember when he, Mr. Miyagi, basically put the bandana around him and he said, look, this is what I expect from you. This is the commitment. And I think if you get a great mentor, it can change the entire landscape of your career and how you navigate it.
No, I agree. I think it's that direction. It's the coaching. It's perspective, because you may be reacting to feedback and overanalyzing it, and in our minds, your confidence, or it may be you're looking for mobility, but you don't know how to start because it's not easy because you're in a group. How do I start? How do I start that journey? How do I form the network?
Yeah.
Because at least they tell you for the culture of that organization how to do it, or networking with people. Even you're looking to make a move outside into a different role.
So this person who was the senior PM that became your manager, did you ask him or her, or did it just happen very naturally, organically?
It was earlier on. I'd gone to him for counseling and for advice, and then become my manager. Is a different relationship, of course.
Yeah.
But I think at that point, I'd taken what he said, and of course, you have other people that you would ask for advice. And I think over time, the best advice was if you can compliment your manager. Whether you like that part of the role or not, it makes you more valuable.
Yeah.
So that's something I realized that. And then I realized I could, because he's a very good investor. How do I make his life easier? Because he wants to focus on the portfolio, but we also have to grow AUM. So I could help with the marketing side as well as managing portfolio. It's a fine balance. So then you have to, walk, there's talking the talk, but you got to walk the talk.
Yeah.
So that helped. But also, it helped that he was well regarded in the firm.
Yeah,
he
carried a lot of
mobility.
Yeah,
and he had mobility options within the firm.
Okay.
Because sometimes you're waiting for a responsibility to come up. So again, moments in time.
Actually, talking about that is really good advice. I would say, the vast majority of the senior people that we placed, you could put them into two pockets, two camps. It's either they're very complementary, right? They'll get along with the other existing senior practitioners and they'll get things done. Or you have a mercurial kind of individual that's going to go out and drive and push the business. But it tends to be one or the other. So Goldman, and then after that, what happened? Tell us a little bit about that part. This is the part of the journey I'm really interested in.
Okay, sure. I'm showing my age now, Paul. I think
you still got all your hair.
So I had managed long-only money for almost 10 years.
Yeah.
And this is sort of 2006, 2007. I thought about, I'm going to do something different.
Where were you living in London, by the way?
Oh, okay.
All over the place. Well, what were your key places?
Different places. So when I first moved, before even business, I was with a company. So I was in South Kensington. So I was very fortunate. I didn't realize how much. But then later on, I lived in that area, but then Bayswater, Notting Hill.
Yeah. Fantastic.
And then later on, eventually I moved back to South Kent, Chelsea. And then when we had kids, I went to Nappy Valley, so Battersea and Clapham.
Yeah. Well, so my mum and dad met in Clapham, and it was a shithole back then. But it's become somewhat gentrified. I don't know if you know this. Yeah. I grew up in Southall.
Oh, you grew up in Southall, okay.
And on my street, there were 110 families, and there were only 2 non-brown families. There was a Jamaican family and my family.
Well, you grew in Southall. You like Indian food and Jamaican food and others.
Well, you have to, right? Funny enough, I could never deal with spicy curry more or less recently. But okay, and then why I asked that question is most people from London don't live in central London. Yeah. So they, I always had an hour commute. In fact, when I chose my university, this is crazy, but I chose my university based on proximity, and it was cheaper for me to go from zone 5 to zone 6 than it was from 5 to 1. I couldn't afford to go to zone 1.
Yeah.
And that's terrible, right? And I always, looking back, I shouldn't have even thought like that. But at the time, when come from a very humble family, you know, so when you talk about getting the Eurostar and what have you, I had never traveled in Europe until quite recently. When I grew up in the UK, I had, apart from going to Ireland, I didn't see any of it. So, but you made the most of your time there, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the experience of, like you said, when I came to that point in my career, because I was in London, enjoyed it. You're managing international equities. Alternatives were growing.
Yeah.
And I had interest on the long short side.
Yeah. So 10
hedge
years,
fund side.
10 years on the side.
Yeah. And I was lucky, again, this is about relationships. I came over the wall at Goldman. Goldman had a big tradition of people spinning out to launch hedge funds, a lot of alumni. And with a co-partner who also I'd met earlier in my career at Goldman, who was part of the same associate program, who had moved on to another, to work at an alternatives firm. We co-launched a firm in Goldman. We became a client. So I left on good terms and became a client of the firm.
Slow down, because you just said that in a quick sentence.
Yeah.
But so how did you guys even commence the discussion? Did you sit down and say, hey, you know, let's look at this? I'm just curious, because that's a big thing, right?
No,
you're young still. How old are you?
I was about 36.
Okay.
30, when we were starting to lay out the plans. I would say what happened was we could see a cycle was coming. We knew that hedge, from a risk-adjusted point of view, that we wanted to really explore the intellectual side, also of shorting stocks, of going long and short and risk-adjusted return. And we saw opportunity, and we were stock pickers. So if you can express that both long and short, you can actually add a lot of value.
Yeah.
Frankly, it was something, when you've managed long only by that time, it's a new challenge. For me, it's about a new challenge, improving it. Now, and the fact that you could do it with someone that you've met before, that had worked and in also in the same industry.
Did you, because you know, I had a business partner and we were very close friends. And one of the main reasons why I decided to go into business with him, he already had set up on his own, and I had to persuade him to bring me in. And I took him out for a meal. I got very drunk. He's Muslim, so he doesn't drink. So I don't remember that evening, but apparently I sold him on it. But one of the key things,
you had a good chat.
Yeah. He said the next day he texts me, goes, I'm in. I said, in what? He goes, you don't remember anything, do you? I said, no, but hopefully it was good. But so when you did that and you made that decision, you know, were you thinking, how's this going to work? How are we going to fund it?
There were butterflies. I mean, the key thing was the funding. So we knew at that point, hedge funds were already maturing. This is 2006, 2007. So if you were not above 50 million day one, you weren't going to get the kind of investors that within 6, 12, 18 months to be 1 billion, 2 billion.
And you knew that?
We knew that.
Okay.
And we were fortunate that we came over the wall, and then we met Cedars.
Okay.
And we were fortunate enough to get $75 million locked in 3 years from a Cedar, so we could actually build a sustainable business, recruit the right people.
Amazing.
Not knowing the GFC was coming.
Yeah.
But so that gave us the confidence. Like you said, I was in a good place, he was in a good place, but we knew we had to have that. If we didn't have that, then okay, then you have to look at other, do you consider doing it at the firm you are? Because the firm was toying with that idea.
And how did you come to the name Cork Street?
We were very unimaginative. So it was at Cork Street is in Mayfair, as you probably know, a lot of art galleries. And eventually we thought that we loved the street.
Yeah.
We loved the area.
It has an impact, right?
So we said to name it after the street. Yeah, so that's
that's where your local bar was. That's where you made your decision.
Well, eventually, yeah, we were fortunate that we found a space there for a startup.
So how was the transition from going to being an employee to employer and a businessman?
It was a big transition. So you're they say the proverbial, you're plugging in the socket and you're turning off the lights at night, but you are doing that. So you have to be comfortable doing things that you don't have to face when you're at a larger company.
Yeah.
But it's also a little bit liberating because you have an influence on what's important, but within a different scale. So it's like pluses and minuses, and then you've got to play to your strengths. And then we hire, you've got to hire people that are going to complement you.
Yeah.
So if you're, but we had to do all of the regulatory, you got to get the regulatory sign-offs. There's a huge amount of paperwork, huge amount of presentation. You've got to raise capital.
That's the thing. I think when you run a business, people, it's the same with being a private banker, right? If you're in many ways, if you're a private banker or if you're a lawyer, you're being paid to work with the client or as a banker to manage the money. But the reality is, if you're not a great salesperson, you can't bring the clients through the door. You can't do your job. And if you're running your own business, that 10x, because you're having to raise funds, right? The regulatory side of things. So how did you balance all of that?
Yeah, so the key was that the seeding was key, because then it gave us, we had the business visibility. Okay, we knew what break even was.
Yeah.
So we could be properly institutionalized day one, 7, 8 people, office manager, research.
Where was the
trader.
office?
It was literally on that's Coke Street Capital. Yeah, so we were literally in Mayfair.
Okay.
So you could launch a day one business, and I think after that it was really about getting the right people, but it's also about building the business, raising capital, and then of course we had we had a cycle. We had a major change in the cycle.
So go through what happened next.
Yeah. So I mean, it was surreal because GFC, no one's really featured something like that in terms of the banking system since the Great Depression. So there was no playbook for people who were working then.
It's horrific. What really was bad.
Yeah, and it was horrific because I know a lot of friends in the industry, so it was horrific for everyone. You didn't know at that point your counterparty is going to be around.
Yeah.
For a period of time at the extreme when we're talking about August, September, October of 2008.
Yeah. So
you're trying to manage the business. You've got a personal life. You've got a family. You've got a financial crisis. So you were really tested.
Your dad at that point, were you?
Yeah, I already had. I already had a girl.
Yeah, that changes things because all of a sudden you're thinking beyond just yourself, obviously.
Correct, and it's you're literally, it's your business, so you don't leave it. You're home and you're thinking about it.
Well, funny enough that you mentioned this because when I set up my own business, BNP Paribas was my client at the time, and Michel Longini. Have you ever met Michel?
I have not, actually.
He's a fantastic practitioner. He became, I think, the CEO of BNP in Asia at 38. Very dynamic guy. And I told him I'm setting up my own firm, but the likelihood is that my bosses are going to sue me, and I'll stay out of the game. But it'll take me another 7 months. And he said, no, I want to work with you now because this is the time we need to grow. And I said, well, I don't want to go to court with this, and I'll just, do something else. And he said, look, come and work with me as an independent consultant to the bank. And he said, come up with a proposal and we'll find a way to work together. And I will forever be grateful. And I just think sometimes when you're honest and you are facing difficult times, if you reach out and you speak to people, it's really very rewarding, right? Because they can see that, I was young, I was like 27, 28, up and coming. And so that was the beginning of my relationship with BNP Paribas. Okay. But okay, so then you guys decided to call it a day?
Yeah, so we really coming out of great financial crisis. I mean, it was if you remember then, we were a relatively liquid strategy, so a lot of the other strategies had gated the much bigger funds and all that, so there was no liquidity. And at that point, the timing of the seed and are you at critical mass in terms of AUM?
Yeah.
No one could have banked on a GFC happening. We held our own during the downturn, but before, if you launched in 05 or 03, you could see a path to getting 1 billion, 2 billion. We had ex-colleagues that were 3 billion in AUM in 2007 who launched, for example, in 2003 or something like that. And so, but the launch date in terms of the timing for that was definitely you could not get to that critical mass and the vision that you wanted to be.
That critical mass is interesting because even like in private banking, people say if a boutique private bank in Asia doesn't have this much, they're going to struggle, right? So it's interesting how these numbers are formed, how it all works, and what the cost-income ratio is. So then you said, hey, look, this isn't working. We've got to draw a line in the sand now.
Yeah, it was really about taking a step back and say, what do you want to do? Because coming out, you couldn't simply, in terms of the vision. So then I took a step back, as my co-partner did as well, and what do I want to do? And when I took a step back, I realized I did enjoy being in what I enjoyed about the entrepreneurialism, being your own business. I also enjoy if you can do that at a institution with a structure. And at that point, it was I had looked at different things. I took my time, and I was actually moved to the wealth management side, and I had an opportunity to stay in London, which was my original goal. I had no intention of coming to Asia at that point.
Yeah.
And then an opportunity came up in Asia. So then, growth in Asia, the story, growing a business, the excitement of kind of wealth generation here, and also the fact that you can add value here because of the industry maturity is just starting.
Yeah.
In terms earlier in the path. So that drew me to Asia. I'm from Singapore, so that made it easy. I used to come here every year, so I knew Singapore, but it's different when you live somewhere than when you visit.
For sure.
And then end up coming here in 2011.
Brilliant. And you never left.
Yeah, still here.
Still here.
At your place now.
Yeah. So when you decided to move to Singapore, did you have a clear understanding of what the next 5 to 10 years may look like career-wise in your own mind? Like wealth management was the space, private banking, or?
Yeah, I think wealth management, you knew the structural story, especially the fund that you knew about wealth management story in Asia was very strong.
You knew Singapore was heavily invested in making this a hub. Globally, right?
Singapore, of course, major hub, and also puts you in with the right, like you talk about family office a little while ago. Obviously, we've seen how that's changed over the last, how much that's grown here.
Yeah.
So I knew it was in the right place. In terms of, it's also about finding your place within that. So that's great, but it doesn't guarantee, success or satisfaction. So it's also about how do I apply, at that point I'd been a buy-sider, fund manager, also fixed income, but also run my own business on the alternative side. And I think I realized a top-down asset allocation investment strategy role, which I'm doing now at BNP, you can really bring those experiences to clients and make it real, because wealth management is about relationships, about stories. It's not about, when you're managing a portfolio for an institutional client, it's about people, process, philosophy.
Yeah.
They make the decision on the allocation. They have their own asset allocation framework. Here, you're building it all. And I'll never underestimate that the human side of the business, because in wealth management, it's not necessarily what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
It's about what they want to talk about. Maybe be a succession issue, which could affect how they're going to manage their investments in their business, in their family business, right? So you have to be a good listener. That's the key. And I think I realized at that point, I'd finally become, maybe I can listen a bit at that, because I'd gone through cycles, gone through experiences. And I thought what I liked about this business, it's a people business.
Yeah. Well, that's the great thing about private banking, because you could have a client who owns a rubber plantation, a shipping magnate. It's so diverse, right? Really interesting. And look, you've worked for some great organizations. So JP Morgan.
Yeah. So I originally moved here with them, and of course, that's when the Asia was starting to grow out. Of course, not just there, but a lot of banks. But that gave me the opportunity to do it, and I think really what I take it from there is, it was the first time I worked in wealth management day to day. So when I was in asset management, I had a third of my assets of wealth management clients and channels, but it's different. I serviced that asset, which is very different to service institutional pension clients.
Very different.
But I think on this, it was really about the experience of really, frankly, you're in a new culture, a new place, just like when I moved to London. So similar things, you're out of your comfort zone, but then that makes it exciting. You have Indonesia, you've got Thailand, you've got all these places with different types of businesses, different industries, different challenges.
Yeah.
So it was really the introduction to that was most valuable. And then, of course, the culture of the firm, getting responsibility. I think them seeing that I actually had a little bit of different perspective, not better or worse, just different. It's different. Coming from my background, I was able to leverage that, there when I was there. So I enjoyed that. And I think that's the key is can you have managers that can recognize that?
Yeah. Well, I think what's interesting about you is, even though you're American, you've actually not worked in the US for that long. And I know quite a few people like that. You're really very, very, very international. And the other thing about what I've learned in the last maybe 15, 17 years in private banking is you have to adapt, because, you had the tax amnesty in Indonesia, you had 1MDB and what have you. So you have to swivel, you have to pivot. And then how did BNP Paribas come about? And how does it go from what you worked for some major US banks to a French bank?
Yeah, I finally get to use my French or practice my French growing up. I had a view to build, I really want to build out a CIO office. Okay. And when I met senior people at, BNP, they had this similar vision and they wanted to invest in it. And obviously, given the diversity of the business, strength of the business, which I knew very well, just being in the industry. But it was about the people. So when I met the people, when I saw the vision, and I saw there was obviously there was a lot of support for it, it made it pretty compelling.
Yeah.
So that was really what it was. I want to build a CIO office, proper one, build investment culture in an organization, because I felt at that point in my career, that's what I can give.
Yeah.
In terms of as an added value the most.
Well, I feel that unequivocally the CIO has got to be one of the top three, if not the top face of the bank in many ways, right? Because you're a voice to the bank. And but what's interesting is that the role of CIO varies tremendously from bank to bank, right? And the setup. So just give us an overview of how your department is set up and your reporting lines and really what's the essence of what it is that you do now.
Sure. So in my role, and it varies by bank, so I've seen it, is the CIO sits across advisory and our discretionary businesses.
Yeah.
And that asset allocation that we develop, and I sit on a global team, so that's done at a global level with my colleagues in Europe. That asset allocation of strategy flows through the entire business.
Are you speaking to these guys in French, by the way?
Well, the first few calls I did tell them I went to INSEAD and stuff, and then they're we'll go to French. But of course, I told them, well, I can understand, but I won't be asking that many questions, and I might be a bit delayed. But it helped. It helped, frankly, to integrate working in Europe and having lived in France, speaking some French. But no, it's in English. But in the bank's very global, so of course there's quite a few people. There's others that wanted English, but so that helped. And I think when I think about the setup, your question is it's really across the business. What I like is the ability to have an impact across the business. I work with our heads of fixed income, our heads of equity, our heads of FX, our head of DPM, our head of funds selection. So you can make an impact across the business. So you're almost like you want to build the perfect souffle.
Yeah.
If we're going to use a French
great analogy.
Analogy. So you're trying to do that, and so of course sometimes it can get a little burnt or can be raw. But to answer your question on the interaction, yeah, I mean I sit in an office, but I'm probably annoying for my colleagues, but I'm out and about because if something. Okay, we may have a view on fixed income, but I want to know what's happening in the new issue market. So I talk to our fixed income, or I'll talk to our investment counselors. Counselors are the ones that also are making the souffle for clients. And what are they seeing? What are they hearing? What's working in terms of the recommendations?
Well, think about the investment counseling function. It's probably about 15 years old. And I remember, in fact, I helped BNP set it up. And at the time with Sebastian Maspelé, who was running the department.
Yeah.
And I remember at the time, bankers hated the notion of investment counselors because they were worried about anyone else speaking to their clients. I think it was clear that all the banks wanted to, in part, better service the clients, to institutionalize the clients. And now in most private banks, I think maybe 60, 70, maybe even 80% of the flows are facilitated through the investment counseling function. It's quite interesting. So you'll sit down, you'll walk the floor, you'll speak to those guys, and then you speak with your counterparts globally, and then you exchange ideas or you share with them what's happening in Asia.
Sure, it's global, yeah. So I speak to my clients globally on the CIO side, of course, because there's a network across the world of senior people. But then, of course, I'm based in Asia. So it's how do you take that strategy and how do you make it relevant for clients here? Because it's a different level. We want to build discretionary assets, but it's a different level of penetration than it is in Europe or the U.S.
Completely.
So it's those kind of challenges. It's more first generation wealth moving to second or third here, while there's more of a mix in other places. So it's adapting that. But frankly, this business is you can sit and be in an ivory tower, write amazing research that no one reads.
Yeah.
So if you don't focus on communication, you don't focus on whatever the vehicle is, podcasts, notes, outlooks, webinars, but frankly, it's also being available for meetings. So one of the things, I try to make myself, and you get brought to a lot of meetings.
Well,
client meetings, you can really help. Then you can really
clients as well.
Yes.
Really?
So so you meet. So that's key because it's one thing to talk about investments, talk about strategy.
Yeah.
But it's another thing to hear about challenges in markets, hear about challenges.
But again, I know a lot of great investment guys that prefer to be behind their desk, and I think that's great. There's a place for everyone, but I think speaking to clients and being able to communicate directly with them is really important. Really.
Yeah, and I think it's a feed, it feeds on itself. If they see you have the appetite for it, then you're brought.
Yeah.
It goes both ways as well. So, and also you have to add value.
Sorry to interrupt. You've got real money managing experience. You ran your own firm, right? So your ability to connect and relate to these guys is probably heightened, no?
It can be, and that helps. And of course, experience helps different ups and downs through your career. Understanding their businesses, because I've analyzed their businesses, maybe from an investment standpoint, if it's a different types of industries. But it's also like listening, like we were talking about earlier, is really important, because CIOs can come in with their pitch book and their deck, or investment counselor, anyone, and you're on autopilot. You have to read the audience.
Yes.
That's the key. So, I was on a presentation recently where if right away I'll see, are people making eye contact? Webinar is the worst because you don't have the body language. You can't see as well.
Well, sometimes
so you have to look at the screen to see, are they engaged?
Yeah.
And not. I try to remember, it doesn't always happen. I want questions. Interrupt me anytime. This is informal. You've got to be able to connect, because some people are shy to ask. Other people need time. And you could be in a tangent about an investment topic they have no interest in. So, because you're in charge of kind of communicating about our overall framework. So that's key. And that's something that's important at whether you're a CIO, investment counselor, relationship manager in any industry.
Yeah.
So to me, and it takes time to be able to get in that rhythm, that you're not on autopilot.
And will you sit down routinely with the bankers and sit down and have a presentation like once a week? How does that look like?
Yeah, so we have like a Monday morning meeting where we'll plan the week before, like have a macro topic that links with what our product solutions specialists would also follow on. So it's timely.
Yeah.
It can make an impact. So that's key, because you want to read off one page. You're like, when I joined, that was a key thing. Takeaway, I was like, I wanted to do that. Senior management supported that we need to have one firm, one view. We need to have consistency of messaging, and we need to be every week putting that out. So we do that on a Monday, coordinated with our specialists.
Talking about webinars, so my wife's a professor at NUS, and I think on average during COVID, a third of the students have a black screen. And I had one prospective client where they wanted to speak to me for the first time, and they wanted to do a video call very specifically, and they wouldn't turn on their screens. I said, well, why are we doing a video call? And I said, are you at home in your boxer shorts? I don't care, turn it on. They wouldn't turn it on. I said, it's the end of the conversation. What's the point of doing it? So you can see me. It's not an interrogation. But it is fascinating, because the whole landscape of what we do and how we do it has completely changed. How are you getting the message out to the bankers and then to the clients? Because now there's so many different mediums. It's like, what's the best?
There is no best. What I think it depends on the client. So we have to be, we're flexible in our thing. So we have, of course, we publish a monthly research document that goes to clients. We do podcasts. We do webinars. We do also, I would say, we started a new thing called the CIO chat room, where it's not just about the CIO speaking. The CIO, my colleague, you have to have a great team. Grace, she's also interviewed our product solutions people to make it more interactive. What are the challenges of the day in fixed income? What about what is AI going up too much, or whatever it is? Yeah. When are yields going to peak? So that's something we're doing. So I think it's a kaleidoscope, because social media messaging, instant messaging, we're bombarded with information. Yeah, key is, can you get out your 3 key messages?
Yeah.
That's the key. That's the challenge. It's not easy.
That's a Margaret Thatcher thing. She always said, if you have a presentation, you've got to have 3 takeaways, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
So that's the takeaways. But I think it's a multiple channel. And of course, you got to tailor to what some clients want to read something. They don't want to listen to something. Other people want to listen to something and don't want to read something. So that's why you have to have more channels.
What I'm curious about is, do you have younger to mid-level staff, be it on the investment product side or the banker side, that actually reach out to you and say, hey, Prashant, I'd love to get to know you? Because I'm guessing the answers maybe no or less so, and say, can I take you out for a coffee or lunch? And because I always think there's a rank and file system in a lot of banks. And if I was an up and coming banker and I saw you and I just thought, hey, I can learn from this gentleman, let me reach out to him. But does it happen or not really?
It does happen, but some people are shy. Like I was shy. I might have been shy to reach out to someone who's in a company in a more senior role when I was their age. So I can relate. So I think that's where about the informal interaction. If you're on the floor, you're walking the floor, you're talking to people, you're asking, what do you think about the Euro football championship score last night.
Who do you think is going to win then?
Who do I want or who do I think? Who do I think? Spain, France, probably the favorites, but England, let's see if they can get an offense going. I think probably England has great talent, but it just doesn't seem to be, we still haven't,
We always
figured out
We always struggle to pull it together right.
A team. But France looks, of course, is a major power, and Spanish midfield looks good.
Well, it's a funny story. I was in Vegas, and I go there quite often for the big fights, and I was there for my 40th, which was Conor McGregor against Mayweather, and I was going to put a bet on, and I bumped into someone, and it was Vinnie Jones.
Oh, wow.
And he dropped all of his notes and stuff, and I didn't realize who it was until we stood up, and I said, "Fuck, Vinny." He goes, "Listen, we've got to get the bets on," and because he heard my English accent, and he was such a nice guy, so obliging, and I was a bit worried he was going to try and grab me like he did Gaza back in the day.
I don't know how, does he look as intimidating in person?
You know what? He's older now, so he's. I'm 5'6.5". He was a lot shorter than I thought.
Okay.
But he's just a character, and you could tell he's actually a very jovial, nice guy.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing about Las Vegas is you will see many people that are famous, and there won't be too much of a reaction. So talking of which, the night I went to before the fight, I was on my own, and I had booked a dinner at Nobu. And the thing about how I always do with the big fights is I will book the restaurant and the hotel as long as I can cancel without paying a fee, typically before I'll get the tickets. Sometimes you can't get access to the tickets straight away. So I turn up, and do you know the color commentator Jim Gray?
Oh, of course.
Okay, so let me unpack the story. So earlier that day, I had seen that Mike Tyson was doing a signing at Fields Sports Shop. I think it's called Fields. And I went there, and there was a massive queue of like 150 people. And I went to the front, you know what I'm like, and I said, "Is there any way you can get to the front?" And they said, "Well, if you spend more than $150 on any of these items, this is the queue." And there were like 3 people. I said, "Yeah, please." So I got a pair of custom shorts, Mike Tyson shorts. And so they don't let you take a picture of your cell phone. They use and they were changing the SD card. So there's Mike and I. And he was clearly on some uppers and downers, and he's got this aura of a brooding caged tiger, and it's Mike Tyson, but he's my favorite boxer of all time to watch, So I said to him, "Hey, Mike, how you doing?" And he was bored, right? Because he's signing hundreds. And I said, "Look, do you know where I can get a decent cigar tonight?" And he turns to me and he says, "Well, I won't do an accent. I won't do the lift. I won't do the lift." But he turns around and says, "Well, where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm in Nobu later." And he said, "Oh, Caesar's Palace, just opposite Nobu. There's a great cigar lounge, and I might see you there later." So it's a flippant comment. So I got my shorts, went back. I was really happy. We turned up, and I'm in Nobu waiting, and Jim Gray's there with his wife. And we're stood next to each other. And I got up before I even saw him because there were only a couple of chairs. There was a big queue, even though we had booking. And I said, "Oh, would you like to take my seat?" Because his wife, they were probably in their 60s. And so I started just talking to her, just polite conversation, turns around, and her husband's Jim Gray, and said, "Mr. Gray, I'm a big fan. How you doing?" And I said, "Who do you think is going to win the fight?" And he said, that's a stupid question. So then he shows me his phone. He says, "Look, I've just recorded this. It's going out at midnight." He said, "Interview Conor McGregor and Mayweather earlier that day." So anyway, my table came up and got called up, and they didn't have anywhere to sit together. So I said, "Why don't you sit with me until I'm on my own until your friends arrive?" So lo and behold, they sat with me, and then they left to go and join. I think it was the owner of the Dallas Cowboys. I'm not a football fan. So anyway, left, waved at them, went for my cigar. I'm in the cigar lounge. Mike Tyson walks in, looks at me, does that, and I look like this, and he comes up to me, takes the cigar, has a little puff, and
wow, that's larger than life. You can't imagine that.
Well, actually, sorry, he said to me, "Do you mind?" I said, "Mike, I know where your mouth's been," and then he took it anyway. Went out. As he was going out, Jim Gray was coming out. They hugged each other, right? Looked into the cigar lounge and both waved at me. It was so surreal. And a lot of people don't know this. So Jim Gray, I think his first ever interview at 17 was with Muhammad Ali. He was called in as a last-minute replacement, and he did Mike Tyson's first ever interview, or one of his first ever interviews with Customato, and he did Muhammad Ali's last interview ever. What a story, yeah?
Wow, that's amazing. I mean, people don't know that you're obviously you're a boxing.
Yeah,
you're a boxer, girl.
Yeah. So but the thing about sports is, if you're a sports fan or any type of arts, it could be music or acting, if you get to watch the world's best practitioners do what they do up live, and if you've actually tried to do that sport and you realize just how brilliant they are. So like I don't know if you saw a recent interview with Roger Federer, where he was given some sort of graduation PhD, right, some doctorate.
Correct.
But he was saying, and like, he's my favorite tennis player of all time. He said that it annoyed him when people said, "Oh, you make it look it's so easy," and obviously, but he said actually that's the greatest compliment, because he worked his entire career to make it look effortless.
Yeah, he makes it look effortless.
You really. What are your favorite sports then?
Oh gosh, watching or playing? I think I'm much better watching than playing. No, of course we talk about basketball, of course I like that, but I like Premiership. I like soccer, football, English football.
Who do you support?
Oh, Arsenal.
Yeah, me too.
I moved to the UK just at the time just before Wenger came on, and then of course I love the style of play.
Well, the thing is, it's also for me, it's where you grew up, right? I mean, in theory, my team would have been Watford.
Sure. If I was in the UK, it would have been different. Depending on where I grew up.
Yeah, but it's funny, but it's I don't follow it so much now because of the time difference.
True. Yeah, I mean, you're not watching.
So, who are your top 3 favorite players of all time to watch? Not maybe the best, but your favorite
in football.
Yeah,
to watch. The first one comes to mind is Bergkamp.
Okay,
because of
what a finisher.
Yeah, what a finisher, and the style and the way
elegant.
The ball is literally attached to his foot.
Yeah,
still remember the volley from the World Cup. Against Argentina.
Yeah,
so he to me was mesmerizing to watch.
Yeah,
and then of course if you're sticking with Arsenal, then Thierry Henry.
Yeah,
and then for pure metal and for strength, Vieira.
Yeah,
because he was to me he was a defensive midfielder.
Oh yeah, beast.
So,
and in basketball.
Also, of course, number one, that's MJ. I'd say after that, it's a good one. I'd say in terms of what I've seen, obviously Kobe's up there.
Yeah.
In terms of, he's almost like an MJ clone in some ways, but in a different way. And I'd say at his peak, Tracy McGrady.
Okay.
Because he was kind of a 6'10" Kobe, but he had injury issues.
It's interesting.
And then being from Chicago, Derrick Rose.
Okay. Well, I take a lot of aspiration and inspiration from leaders on the football field, right? So Alex Ferguson, I've read a couple of his books. Not that I'm a Man U fan, but man, that guy, such an interesting background and a leader. And he actually ended up spending quite some time in Harvard afterwards, right? Real fascinating.
Ah, yes.
But when you look at leaders that you've come across in business, without mentioning names, but what are some of the qualities that you truly admire?
Tough but fair. I think especially when you're earlier in your career, you can be somewhat off-putting, can be disconcerting, but you can be tough, but you have to be fair.
Yeah.
I think that mix gets the best out of people. I think also when I think about really good ones, it's about if you're on a certain role in your career, but you can see that person in a different part of the organization or different role within the organization, being able to put them in that slot rather than losing them, I think is another one where I've seen, can you get the most out of that human capital?
Yeah.
Because it's just a human capital business. It's not always easy to do that. And I'd say the third thing I would say is when I think about how people make decision making, that mentorship we talked about earlier, like you said, I think you need to be a player coach these days.
Yeah.
Like in my day, you didn't get much feedback when I started. You didn't get as much when you started. It was more, and then it's gotten progressively better. But I think that kind of feedback is important because without that, people are looking for it. It depends how you deliver it. Yeah. We all receive it every day, every year. And I think that's key because these days I think the young generation now, there's more mobility. They want to be challenged. They have their own personal, whether it's sustainability, other things they're interested in. How can they make their role meaningful? Maybe it was that the bar is higher now.
Don't you think the thing about, we're going through these strange times, but with feedback, it's almost like I feel, just look at the internet and comments on Instagram and what have you, people are more comfortable saying negative things than positive things. And I find with a lot of the senior people that I work with have said, I've got some negative feedback. What do you think? The people that I coach. And I said, well, you've got to listen to it, but you can't please everyone and you can't be everything to everyone. I think it's important to be authentic and to lead from the front, lead from behind, and drive the, like if you look at Alex Ferguson, you know, everyone respected him. He was a fearsome leader. He probably couldn't exist in today's business world so easily, in the corporate world anyway. But I'm old school. I love that old school way of thinking.
No, I mean, he did it his own way, and I don't think anyone will have, I mean, what he did in the Premier, how many titles he won, but also his leadership. Like you said, you said he went to Harvard, but he's a case study on how to manage, how to get the best out of people, competitive fire. Mercurial. He can lose his temper, but then he makes tough decisions. He let players go because they were great players, but he didn't see them on the team. Yeah. So that sends a very powerful message. And these days, as you know, the players have so much more power. It's different than then. Yeah. So to me, those kind of skills he had were incredible because some of the best players were moved out when he thought it wasn't better for the team.
Well, I placed the guy in DPM Equities a while ago, and the overall head of the investment business, the ultimate hiring manager, massive soccer fan and a Man United fan, and he wasn't convinced. And I said, you know who Dennis Irwin is, don't you? That's what I said to him. I said, he's Dennis Irwin. And he said, he's Dennis Irwin. I said, he's Dennis Irwin. So he said, okay.
Yeah.
And he's Dennis Irwin. It's like, you know, he's there consistently, quietly gets his job done. You know what I mean? I actually thought, so sometimes the sporting analogies kind of work in business as well.
But you bring up a really important point, like money management, wealth management, any kind of walk of life, how the quiet ones, more introvert. I don't believe in extro and introvert. We all have shades of it in different ways. But how do you get the best out of the most quiet? Some of the best asset managers, wealth advisors are quiet. And it's the people that talk more, perhaps get attention. Yeah. How do you get the best out of them? And they actually play a very powerful role in outcomes, reasoned outcomes. That quietness, like they say, J.K. Rowling, she was introverted, but she was on the trains thinking about Harry Potter, thinking about the books, and she didn't want anyone to ask for a pen to write it, so she had to think up in her head. So that quiet reflection and creativity that comes from solitude, that's a big challenge. Yeah. In every business. And when I think about some of the people I work with, some of them are very quiet. Yeah. And they led through their times for silence, their times for pausing.
That has to be allowed. It's got to be facilitated. And I think it's well, you know this, when you go through different periods of your career, I think it's so important to take stock, to be introspective. It's interesting that, you know, one of the things that I find is, you know, a great definition of being an introvert is if you spend time with people, even if you enjoy it, it naturally depletes your batteries, right? Vis-a-vis an extrovert, it's the opposite. What would you say you are? Would you in the middle, more introvert or extrovert?
Ooh, I'm gonna get some flack from this side. But no, I think I'm more extrovert, but from the middle side outwards. But I do enjoy my downtime as well. Yeah. Because you have to have that downtime. Everybody has to have it. Yeah. So I do enjoy the buzz of working with people, being in a team, talking and go out. I like that.
But then when you go home, you can...
Yeah, the weekends you need downtime. Yeah. You need time to recharge your battery. No one's always on. I'm sure maybe some people are. For me, I can't always be on. Like the weekends, I also want to bring down there to spend time with the family, do things. You know, you're not as active compared to perhaps a work day, but you're in a different way. So be exercising, going out.
But why I think that's so important to know, if you as an individual struggle with that, is, you know, as we get older, and I see some very senior people like yourself, your ability to, your energy management, right? From, you know, so people say to me, what's your diet?
Coffee.
And I'll say coffee. but if, in real terms, your diet is not just what you eat and drink, right? It's everything. It's what you read, you know, how you sleep, how you adjust, how you adapt. But one thing, being a salesman, I coach a lot of people on, because I think sales is perhaps the most difficult job in the world. I believe we're all salespeople in different ways. But how do you understand that? So a lot of introverts think they're at a disadvantage because they're an introvert. And I always feel, in fact, some of the very best salespeople that I know are uncomfortable selling. And for me, the sale is really only at the beginning and quite often at the end. But then if you're factual, you present sound, solid information, you're very transparent, and you address the problems first. And I think, that's very powerful, and especially in our business.
No, you're right. I think this transparency and being frank, things happen, things go wrong. If you're the first call, if you're a salesperson, I think your people are taught that, but it's a cliche, but it's so important. You're the first call.
Yeah.
And it's on your personal life as well, everywhere. If there's something you need to deal with, you need to be proactive and transparent. That's, to me, key. And that people recognize that, they see that, because those aren't easy conversations. I think that's one of the key things. I think it's a mix of skills you need. You have to adapt to the situation, we were talking about read the audience, read the body language. And you also have to, like you said, you've got to play to your own strengths. Some people are slightly more introverted, some people are more extroverted, but how do you bring that out? If you're aware of it, it's the self-awareness.
Yeah.
Like earlier in my career, I may have had a question I was burning to ask you, but I'm not going to ask you because you're someone senior.
Yeah.
I'd wait till the very end. I'd be the last person to ask the question. So you also have to become self-aware. Okay, I have that. I have to. If I have a question, I want to ask it. I got to ask earlier. Why wait to a point? So that self-awareness takes time.
Well, what I wanted to ask you is, I've worked in all over the world like you have, and but I was very young when I came to Singapore. How did you find the journey of being, an American, working in London, which is a little bit more conservative, and in Singapore, which is even more so? Did you have to adapt and adjust, even though you've worked in very international firms?
No, you're absolutely right, because like when you're working with your colleagues and you're working with clients, I can work with a very UK pension client, to then presenting to us in London, present to a Liechtenstein-based private bank with advisors all over, to speaking to a U.S. endowment or university, all in a couple of weeks. So you have to flex. Now, it helped to have worked in different places, but over time, that people recognize that. Some people want what they're comfortable with. So it's the mix of team you bring.
Yeah.
So if you're bringing, I would be, you don't always go alone, you go with a team.
Yeah.
So that helps. And that's underrated. I think when you bring, in certain cases, you need to address something straight on one-on-one. Other times you need to bring a team. And there's also good, bad companies. There's people that deliver tough messages and people that also give you the other side of it. It's shades of gray. Business life is about shades of gray.
Yeah.
That's really important. So, and I've been on both sides of that, but I felt comfortable over time. Like you said, you got to be authentic. If you're authentic and transparent and you're frank, people respect that.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, I remember some meetings, where the high yield, when I was in asset management, our high yield portfolio manager was presenting, and he got absolutely drilled. He couldn't go through his presentation. He got a million questions. So I knew on the fly, I'm not going through my international equity presentation. I got to first off address their question, pivot, and go. I just benefit because he went first. We were laughing later at the airport having a beer.
Yeah.
He's like, oh man, that was like because you don't know sometimes things take a twist. But I was able to watch that, take that in, rather than think about, I just gotta go through my slides quick and go. Adjusted it, and then mine went much smoother, but because I could watch what happened. And that's where reading the audience, seeing the mood, kind of go to what the key questions are early on in a conversation, really important.
Let me ask you this, in terms of guiding people along their journey that are either going for an appraisal or a promotion, so that they're applying for one or they're hoping they'll be considered for one, or if you're the manager appraising someone, can you just share with me what you think is the best way to approach both of those?
Yeah, I think there's, first of all, the individual, because everyone likes to communicate in different ways. So through your career, you have people that come to you and want feedback and come after other people who they're more going to rely on the feedback you give. And I've been on both sides of that as well. Because of course, we all get feedback. So that's the first thing is, again, building the relationship with that and knowing the boundaries. Two is, I think there's constructive, there's feedback that's not constructive, and there's feedback that's constructive.
Yeah.
then and that's something where, again, the better managers I try to emulate. It's never perfect. I'm sure I can do better. And then third is, what is their longer term? Because like I have aspirations, you have aspirations. So especially in younger people, they may not know, but they may come into a role, but then they're seeing other things. How can I develop them? How can I give them the responsibility that they deserve? Whether it's seeing clients, whether it's presenting, whether it's it could be anything. It could be doing research. It could be mentorship. It could be anything. So that part of it is the soft skill side, and then reskilling. Like, how I can't teach you this. I'm not equipped. Well, you should go meet that person. You should do this training. Yeah. You should do a sustainability certificate. You should whatever it is, because there are people interested in so many different things and finding their passion. So like, to me, is like, what makes you tick? What's your passion?
I love it.
That if I can figure that out, hopefully I can add some value as a manager. But like a lot of times
language at work, right? So would you have to engage HR? Have you suggested they go and do this? And let's just pretend it may or may not be funded by the organization, right? But I always find it interesting, because I always suggest that people, they invest in themselves, even if it's not, right? And how do you dovetail that into the rest of your career?
I'm amazed. Young people now, they invest so much, even more than I feel like they're doing CFA or they're doing a sustainable on their own. But
you're observing that, is it?
I'm fortunate that, BNP is very learning and development. We have a very strong culture of that. So a lot of these things are encouraged, and the firm has programs where you can actually do it. But like, we're scratching the surface, because there's a huge amount of learning and development online that you don't even know if you don't access. So one of the things we're trying to do is improve the knowledge of what we have, because half the time there's so much there that you can be used so much more of.
Yeah.
And so it's a mixture of that, but we're lucky that we're at a large firm that I believe believes in career education, or what's the word, lifelong learning.
Yeah.
So that is probably really strong where I am. So that good news, it's there, but then how do you figure out how that maps to an individual person?
Yeah.
That's also key in that.
Well, the thing is with you, I would imagine is very daunting, is you're looking at everything globally. So where do you decide where to look and how to channel your energy? That in itself must be, a bit of a headache.
Yeah, I mean,
from an investment perspective.
The reason I like what I do in general, whether it's if you're investing business in general in different roles, is there's no single day, the same day. It's, things can change completely unexpectedly, whether it's an ERM crisis, internet bubble, GFC, whatever it is, but lots of mini events along the way. That makes it extremely stimulating, because investment markets are a puzzle. And you can, if you're right, 60, 70% of the time, you're the first quartile.
Yeah.
And you cannot be right 100% of the time. So from day one, you're humble and you're scarred. You're humbled and you're scarred. So that's the key. But to answer your question more precisely is, because you're taking in so much information, the key is 70 to 80% of information is not relevant, or it doesn't change your view. You have to look for the information that challenges your view. And that gives you more conviction in your view and the firm's view. That's what we do as a team when we debate ideas, is you check your ego at the door. When you challenge a view, you're challenging the view, not the person.
Do you get up in the morning and are you all opening the broadsheets? I'm just fascinated. What is
in the old days? Absolutely. So of course, I guess it's a lost art reading newspapers. But when I grew up, I was on the tube or I was on the subway.
Yeah.
I would be going like this around.
Yeah.
And I missed the fact that even though you can take that information online now, it's not arranged in the same way.
Yeah.
So of course that's important. But information sources are more. So back in the day, of course, you read the FT, Wall Street Journal before you came in. Maybe you read another newspaper early on, and you're in early. So I was used to coming in early, but you also then you're reading more specific information, company results, other things, macro information, politics, whatever it is. Now though, you're saturated.
Yeah.
So the biggest part is the filter.
That's the thing, right?
So to me, it's that initial filter is the key part of the day of what I ignore that's not relevant and what I have to do more work on, or what we have to discuss as a global team, because it may be something we need to challenge ourselves. So you could have, you could have Brexit, or you can have any event that comes out of the blue. How are you going to deal with it? How are we going to think about the policy? How do we think about economics? How do we think about trade? But it's frankly, there was also a ton of noise. And what I find is, like you said, the negative story gets 10 times the hits of a positive story. So you have to start with the premise that, because the more dramatic the headline, the more clicks you get and the more money, social media can make. So, and that's, in our day, that was the nightly news. Yeah. The nightly news was grisly, most of it, and then you got the weather and some sports. But now that's social media, because the more dramatic in every place in the world is that, is the thing. So that's what you also have to tune out in terms of that. But within that 10% that's relevant, that's really valuable.
And then how do you feel pressure to lean towards certain trends? And because for you, you've got to remain as objective as possible, and you have to, filter out all that white noise around you. I'd imagine that's not easy either.
Yeah, you can be. You're massively overstimulated. Now, I've been in it long enough where I can filter a lot out. Okay. Then I'm much better than I could 20 years ago. Yeah. Because once you live through cycles and in all kinds of different investment events, I won't go through them all, but then you have a better idea, but history doesn't repeat, it rhymes. Yeah. So like even the AI bubble now, but I wouldn't call it a bubble, is different than in 2000 because it's the big companies that are profitable doing share buyback and they had big earnings increases. Now we can argue what they're worth. Yeah. But in 2000, it was small cap companies you haven't heard of and people were looking at eyeball valuation. So a lot of people in my generation that looked at AI may have said sold too early. Yeah. We can argue now how much maybe it's overheated or not. But the point is you also have to know the limitations of what you've seen before because it doesn't exactly repeat. But having the knowledge of seeing that helps you give you perspective on analyzing AI versus So there's important similarities, but there's huge important difference. So that library, it builds up over time. But at the same time, if a newcomer could analyze this situation better, if they don't have baggage. Yeah. So you see, that's why it's shades of gray.
It's that fine balance. Right?
Yeah, it's shades of gray.
But I think as you get older, you acquire selective hearing skills, which most wives have anyway, right? Certainly mine has. Now, do you fall into this category? You've heard the analogy that most builders' houses are the last to be fixed and finished. Yeah. Talk about you and your investments. How does that? Are you allowed to invest your own money? Is there a conflict of interest? How does that all work?
We're at large bank. The rules are all the same. You've got to hold for 30 days. You're not allowed to trade. You don't trade derivatives. You don't short the market. So it's really about longer term asset allocation. In our view, it really depends on your classification of what you're doing in the firm as to what you're doing. But like when I managed money, of course, I had money in the fund I managed long term that would just stayed there, as well as a hedge fund manager. That's what you would do. So, and of course, the monies now that you invest are really along those rules, but longer term, you're not, it's very different than maybe when you started and you have more freedom. And I think it makes sense because you have to eat your cooking. At the same time, you have to be really faithful to kind of the advice you're giving. So that's where it is. But I would say it's not hugely, it's pretty similar at most larger institutions. It's fairly regimented in terms of that. Competitors, there's no question that's not there, right? Because we would never be trading a security that we wouldn't be where you could influence, all those kind of things that you read about in the market. We would never think about, having that conflict of interest.
One thing that I think is missing for teenagers becoming young adults is this whole journey of how to start the investment program, and I think that's something that I think is really interesting. I mean, like yourself with your kids, have they shown any interest, or if they haven't, have you said, hey, look guys, you need to start thinking about this early?
You do. Like my youngest son who likes video, likes computer games. Yeah. So I said, oh, you should look at Roblox because they can at least help me pay for the subscription. Yeah. Yeah. It depends on their journey.
What was your take on GameStop, by the way, as it was happening and unfolding?
Oh, incredible! Because
do you know anyone? Because I have a friend that did very well on it, okay. But when I see these things, I'm looking to think this is crazy.
No, I mean it was like you couldn't have scripted it, because the moves in that and the extent of the move, and it actually some large, huge hedge funds who fundamentally had a view the share was worth less, went out of business. Yeah, I've seen bubbles, and the risk in shorting, because I've seen it, is that you have unlimited downside risk because when you own a security, it can go down 100%. When you're short a security, it can go up 500%.
That's the thing.
So and then it can go on longer than your liquidity.
Yeah.
Now, you learn those things, but in the GameStop, the combination of, okay, an investment, you can call it bubble or whatever, mania, but the combined with people at home, pandemic, Robinhood, there's a trading, active trading, people trading options, people are at home. That combination is unique, and you wouldn't have been able
Were you following it real time? Like, were you looking at Reddit and stuff yourself, or because there's so much? Why I'm asking is there's so many things happening for you, and you're looking at everything. I'm just curious, like, what falls onto your radar and how?
Yeah, I mean, because we weren't involved. Of course, we weren't involved in the situation per se directly, but it had implications for what risk taking, for hedging, for risk management, also mania. But at the same time, you realized from a I wasn't I wasn't. But if I was in the hedge fund industry, that would have been very, very in my shorts. But I wasn't shorting stocks when the GameStop thing.
Yeah.
The biggest lesson is for the alternative industry is you better have conviction on your short. It better not be a lazy short. And if it is, you better replace it with an index short or a diversified short, or you're going to be absolutely carried out, because you may have a view of what the fundamental value, you may have a catalyst for a short to go down. But if it's you can't stay in the position, and the position goes that large, you have to be a risk manager at that point. Putting my other hat on, former hat on, that's how I would have looked at it.
It's funny because having lived in the US, I always, when I heard GameStop, I just physically thought of the stores that I had seen, and it's like when you think back to like Netflix now, and you think back to Blockbuster Video, and you just think, things have changed so quickly. But when that was happening, I just didn't understand why. I mean, fundamentally, I was thinking this doesn't really make any sense. So
no, you're right. And then the Roaring Kitty meme, and you couldn't, these kind of things, you didn't realize till that person could have that big of an influence in the market as well.
Crazy.
That was not really something that you could have predicted.
And what about, maybe you can't say, but like I feel that alternatives is really one of the sexiest asset classes to look at, and very interesting. And I think it's increasingly becoming a hot area. I know you've covered it for many, many years. But how do you feel about that space?
No, I think it's all about, it's like a surgeon's knife. It can be used very precisely. It's very useful for falcation. If it's used imprecisely, you can cause damage. It's like anything. So, but when we think about what you're accessing, if you think about broader alternatives, so private equity, it's illiquid equity.
Yeah.
So you need a return premium. But the exciting part is if you're at a firm that selects the really, managers that can add value, the managers can add much more value than, say, a U.S. equity straight manager, because your alpha potential is much more, and to the downside.
Yeah.
So if you can marry it with, you're getting private equity exposure, and you can good selection, because the fat tails in terms of the amount of alpha you can add, it's wonderful. And also it's exposure you can't build yourself. They're buying, some of these firms are buying mid-cap companies, they're buying large, other situations where they can add value in a way you can't as a passive investor in a publicly listed security.
Yeah.
And then it's a very broad space. So there'll be times for secondaries when liquidity, right now there's less realization of private equity, so secondaries could be an opportunity. Or it could be private credit, which is a growing asset class, secured lending, non-investment grade, but more analogous to high yield, but you're acting as a single lender or a group of lenders, but that has an asset class where you're secured. The default rates will see, because it's much bigger asset class than 10 years ago. There's a lot of hype around it right now, but at the same time, you got to think that as part of your broader income allocation longer term as an investor.
Yeah.
But the key is, a lot of people overrate, and a lot of people understand if you need liquidity, then of course certain private alternative investments won't be appropriate. But often people overrate the need for liquidity, especially if they're high, ultra high. It's true longer term money. Actually, you don't need it, so you can earn that extra premium. And that's something it's also psychological. Half of our business is dealing with psychology of investing.
Yeah.
The flip side is the alternatives industry is getting much more liquid, because we have the liquid alternatives. But the key is, do those investments, the liquidity of those investments, match the actual investment? Because I've seen in the past where it's a liquid alternative, but then the underlying investments aren't that liquid. So then you have to do that education, that in certain extreme environments, it could be gated.
Yeah.
So, but the industry is evolving, and the thing is, alternatives is also now coming to the mass market, assuming you can do the education, you've gone the regulation, because of technology.
Yep.
because you can aggregate. That's also, how big, how kind of blockchain, you can use that same kind of concepts with, you may not be able with the minimum of institutional investor 10-year PE. Now you can build it through smaller ticket size.
Do you know if BNP private banking accounts can be funded through Bitcoin?
Oh, right now we're not. It's too early for us and many members.
It's just starting, right?
We're not. We're not definitely not doing that right now. In terms of the digital side. We'll see down the road.
It's almost inevitable, right? It is interesting.
Yeah, I think we don't have a view on the asset class. We don't cover it as an investment because I guess the hardest part right now is figuring out what it's worth. You can do lots of work on it. And I think the key is from an asset allocation point of view, when it's a diversifier, it starts to become a bigger asset class. So right now, again, the performance of that asset class is correlated more with NVIDIA or tech. So when you have a point where volatility comes up, and if it's a real digital gold and it gives you decorrelation benefit, then it starts institutionalizing. But it's, this is outside looking in. We don't recommend it, but same time, it's something you have to watch, and it's very interesting as a hobby to see what's happening.
It is. I just want to wrap up by asking you in terms of, because I know you read, but what kind of books are you reading at the moment or have read recently that, they could be, fiction or practical books? I'm just curious.
That's a good question. So I was looking back at books I read. I'm rereading books I read that I was very interested in.
I'm going down that path as well.
With my old age, the books. So one of the books I like, which may be applicable to the political environment, right? Is like around the world is like Catch-22, Joseph Heller, Milo Minder. But I loved the characters. So I read those when I was back in the university days. So recently that Catcher in the Rye. These kind of books, more classic books I grew up, but I've forgotten a lot of the key things, but I remember some of the characters. And in terms of investment books, I reread like Market Wizards. So these are great books where they interview world-class investors, traders, hedge fund, commodity guys. And it's the kernels you pick up in that that you can then think about even now. They're just as relevant. They're written. I guess there's Intelligent Investor and there's people like Buffett there. Intelligent Investor was something written many decades ago, but those kind of books I go back to more on the finance side. But frankly, there's a ton of interesting stuff on that, that we read that are well outside finance.
Well, I think things change. Like now with my kids, right, in high school. So on my daughter's table, she had Inspector Calls, and I said, I acted in that play. And she said, yeah, but because I acted in quite a few different things. And, I thought, I'll pick it up again and remember what it was all about. And it does.
I saw that play in London.
Yeah, it's great,
fantastic. You were in. I didn't realize you were.
No, not in Central London. In our college production.
Oh, okay.
But actually, I put my son into acting when we moved back from the US. I think he was bullied a little bit, and he's very shy. And we found out many years later that he's got ADHD. And my wife and I always felt, because she did some acting, that it's a brilliant thing to bring children, out in terms of their personality. And he made some great friends. And interestingly, so we put him into this camp, and the friends that he made there are still his best friends now. And most of them got into SOTA School of the Arts off the back of that. And it's really, really interesting. But one thing I feel that in the Singapore school system that makes me a little bit sad, because obviously there's so much focus on academia, is that it's very difficult for children to explore and try many different things. So for example, musical instruments, everyone wants to play the guitar, right, or the drums, but like for me, I wanted to be a saxophonist, and I was told start with the clarinet, and I was really bad. And then but like sports, you may start off playing football but fall in love with something else, and I feel it's a little bit restrictive here. And I think so. That's. I'm just curious, because when I speak to people that I admire, I always try and find out, like, what have you read recently, or what are some of the top books. So on the investment side, like I recently read Ray Dalio's Principles again. Sure. Just that was a really interesting one. But
I have that book.
Yeah. Any books that stand out to you? So if I was a young portfolio manager or wanted to become a CIO, what cornerstone books historically would you say these are good ones?
I'm smiling because the one that was the most famous when I joined the industry was Liar's Poker.
Okay.
And just the way Michael Lewis writes, you can just read it in a few days. It's just so easy. You don't have to be in the banking business.
Yeah.
And it tells a story, but it gives you almost feel like you're on the trading floor at Solomon Brothers in this case, and Meriwether and all those things go on. So you get a real picture.
Visceral, right?
Yeah, visceral. I remember Equities in Dallas, which is a famous part of it. But I think Michael Lewis, like, when you think about what he's done, he's written across different genres, like everything from Liar's Poker to internet to, and even now, and even sports he also had a book on analytics in sports, right? Because AI, and we think about AI and investments, AI is being used in sports, and how you look at players, how you renew their contracts. A 30-year-old player with this kind of, what will they'll project what that person's career is. So I think those books are also interesting. And I really enjoy reading his books. So those are books I also read and reread. I would say the Market Wizard, I know I'm going back to that, and the New Market Wizard, to me, they're a Bible, because you're reading from some of the greatest investors, but in a very humble way again. They talk about how they've lost money, how they've made money.
That's powerful because it's real.
It's real, and it's really, you have your seat at the table in a way you never could. You're never going to maybe meet them.
Yeah.
Stanley Druckenmiller and some of the people you read about, some of the greatest investors of all time. But how you take a really large position, how you manage risk, but then how you blow up and how you come back. Those books, to me, I find very valuable from an investing standpoint, because they're timeless.
Yeah.
Because you can apply situations 20, 30, 50 years ago that are just as relevant now, but it's a different situation.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, for me, I'm very old school, because I know there's so many different ways of learning, and now everything's almost instant, right? But I think there's something in getting. One of the guys that works for me told me, by definition, he said, look, I'm cheap. He's cheap when it comes to, like, he will always buy things on a tablet. Weren't you, young Isaac? But and I said, look, that's great, and you can highlight it.
Yeah.
But there are one or two books I would love for you to open, write notes, don't just highlight, write specific things, because also that process, I always feel, you can read something today, as long as you can relate to it, practice it, use it 3 times tomorrow, and almost become an expert in it. So we have this little game in the office where we'll take any book out of the library, flip it and say stop, and try to make that paragraph relevant to anything, in a conversation with anyone.
Wow, that's interesting.
It's powerful, because I think for me, being a headhunter, being a career coach. Okay, so let's just say if I'm doing a CIO search, a CFO, COO search, you can speak to 10 people that have very similar jobs. The reality is, for example, a COO in one organization may be very operational, in another very commercial. But the guy that's doing the very operational role may be very commercial, but he's not getting a chance to demonstrate it. So then you need to talk about other things to bring it out, and then understand. And through those other conversations, be it travel, food, wine, you get to know their character and their DNA. Like, for example, one of the things I know that I love about you is walk the floor, engage people, speak with people. And I think that comes from being able to link everything together. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you're right. I think, like what you said, the example of the book's an interesting one. I've never thought about it that way. That's you're right, though, because it's that interaction effect. That's what you're looking for. I mean, it's like, we work from home is great because it gets you that solitude and time to work, right? But also that time in the office that informal interaction. That's how I learned.
Yeah.
So it's that informal interaction I learned, where I can make mistakes, where you can have casual conversations. You can learn how things are, quote, really done, or how they were done back in the day. But it's that stories that you hear and do. That to me, because it's people business, like we said, like almost every business is a people business. It's a cliche, but it's down to, that's what it is in the service industry.
100%.
So I agree. I'm sure all the colleagues like me coming around chatting them, but I think that is something that it feeds on itself. And again, if I'm approachable, then other people approach me. Flip side, when I was just starting in the industry, who did I go to? Those people that are approachable.
Yeah.
I felt more comfortable.
Yeah.
So I feel like it's natural if it's your personality. So maybe that's my personality.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm cognizant that needs to be there.
Well, you're giving back as well by doing so, right?
Yeah, and like I get something from that. So I love being a mentor. I've managed analyst programs in the past, just as something just you're doing as something. It's just in addition to your role. At BNP, we have bright young analysts that come in, and I'm energized because these people I would never get in the analyst program now, probably.
Yeah.
And B, they have a new way of looking at something. They ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
They're very ambitious, but of course, they're very early in their career journey. But it's not just about people in those programs, it's also the young people that are in your group. So like what we're really trying to do is foster more informal interaction, mentoring, whether it's lunches or after work drink or whatever it is in our investment service, where we can do that more and more, because then it's easier to have mobility. It's easier to keep people longer in your firm and in your culture.
And BNP, by the way, really has that long-term view. Most people that work, for example, for the private bank have worked there for many, many years. And I love that. Look, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you today. Is there anything you want to cover, ask me, or grill me on, or
maybe next time? But I feel like I do owe you a few questions. But no, but I really enjoyed it. I hope it was useful. Well, I would love to.
No, but it's been really kind of you to spend some time with me today. Appreciate it, man.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.